The envelope sat on the kitchen counter like a threat, bold black letters stamped across the front. Final decree of divorce, Court of Chittenden County. Laura Brennan had known it was coming. Still, holding the thick, official paper in her hand made it all feel permanent in a way that phone calls, hearings, and emails hadn't. Her fingers trembled as she slid her thumb under the seal and unfolded the document, eyes scanning quickly for the lines she dreaded most. Primary residence awarded to petitioner. No spousal support requested. Full custody granted to Laura Brennan, with all legal and financial responsibilities. The last line landed like a blow to the chest. She sat down hard on the vinyl chair at the kitchen table, the silence of the apartment pressing in around her. A year ago, this place had been a home. Now it was just a rented space with beige walls and 1,000 echoes of things she didn't want to remember. A weak cough came from the adjacent room. Laura stood, the decree still in hand, and pushed open the door to Olivia's bedroom. Her daughter, 9 years old, pale, her brown hair tangled from sleep, was curled up beneath a faded comforter with her stuffed owl clutched tightly in one hand. Her breathing was labored again. Laura stepped closer, gently brushing the hair from her daughter's damp forehead. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Just rest. I'm right here." The hospital bills were still spread across the dining table, where she'd left them the night before. 3 of them had red stamps now, past due, and another had a yellow slip attached, warning of collection action if payment wasn't made by the 15th. Olivia's flare-up 2 months ago had nearly landed her in the ICU. The nebulizer treatments helped, but her condition was chronic, expensive, and worsening. Laura returned to the kitchen, heart aching and head spinning. The numbers didn't lie. She had $3,200 left in savings. That would barely cover next month's rent, let alone Olivia's prescriptions, let alone anything else. She opened her laptop, more out of habit than hope, and clicked through the usual job boards. Nothing new, nothing flexible enough to accommodate the dozens of hours a week she needed for Olivia's care. Instead, she clicked, almost without thinking, on a county tax auction link she'd bookmarked weeks ago and forgotten, just to distract herself, just to pretend she had choices. And then she saw it. For auction, historic farmhouse, Maple Hollow, Vermont. Starting bid, $1,100. Needs significant repair. 3-bed, 2-bath. Includes 2.8 acres. She stared at the photo. The house was weather-worn, 2 stories tall with chipped white paint and a crooked porch railing. Set against a backdrop of pine trees and wide-open sky. No HOA. No neighbors yelling through paper-thin walls. No city air, thick with exhaust, that set Olivia's lungs on fire. Laura clicked through the listing. Built in 1898. Vacant since 1983. Property seized for back taxes. Public auction scheduled for Friday. 2 days from now. It was madness. And yet, she couldn't stop looking. That night, long after Olivia had fallen asleep, Laura stood at the window of their small Burlington apartment and watched the streetlights flicker below. She held a calculator in one hand and her bank statement in the other. The math was ugly, but not impossible. If the bid stayed near the minimum, if she used most of her savings now, they could own something. For once. No more rent, no more moving, no more eviction notices taped to their door when she was 10 days late. They could start over, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. She barely slept. Her mind raced through questions she couldn't answer. What if the house was unsalvageable? What if it made Olivia worse? What if it was all a stupid fantasy? But in the morning, when the light came pouring in through the window, she felt something she hadn't in weeks. Determination. That afternoon, Laura took Olivia for a drive. They packed snacks and a blanket and told each other they were going on a scouting mission. Olivia, cheerful in her mask and hoodie, pressed her forehead to the passenger side window as they climbed out of the city and wound north toward the edge of Vermont. Maple Hollow wasn't on most maps. It sat nestled between 2 ridges, a small farming town whose best days had likely passed with the last generation. The streets were narrow, lined with weathered storefronts, and the local gas station looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. But there was something peaceful about it, untouched, quiet. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road that branched off from the main street. When Laura pulled to a stop, she and Olivia just sat in silence for a moment, staring, It was even worse in person. The porch sagged, the second-story shutters hung loose, and the chimney leaned a little to the left. A family of squirrels had clearly taken over the eaves, but behind the decay, Laura saw it. The bones, the potential, high-pitched gables, real wood siding, original glass in the bay windows, the kind of place that had once held laughter and music. A home. Olivia whispered, "It looks like it's waiting for someone." Laura felt something twist in her chest. They drove back as the sun set, casting golden light across the hills. Neither of them spoke much, lost in their own thoughts. The next morning, Laura stood in the cold hallway of the county courthouse, bidding paddle in hand. There were a dozen people in the room, mostly investors and contractors eyeing larger parcels or lakeside properties. When the Maple Hollow listing came up, the auctioneer's voice echoed in her ears. Opening bid, $1,100. Do I hear 1,100? Laura raised her paddle. Bidder 27, 1,100. Do I hear 12? Silence. Going once, going twice. A long pause. Sold. To bidder Yirmiyedi. She barely remembered signing the paperwork. Her hand shook as she handed over the cashier's check. The clerk, a cheerful woman in her 60s, gave her a tired smile. "Hope you've got a strong back and a good hammer," she said with a chuckle. "I've got more grit than tools," Laura replied. "Well, grit goes a long way in a town like Maple Hollow." That evening, Laura packed what little they owned into the back of her aging Subaru, a borrowed air mattress, Olivia's books, a toolbox she hadn't opened since college, and a cooler with food for a few days. She taped a hand-drawn "Home Sweet Home" sign on the back window, Olivia's idea. "Ready to go see our new adventure?" she asked softly. Olivia nodded. "Let's make it ours." And so began their second chance. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees like golden threads, casting shifting shadows over the cracked driveway of the old Whitlow house. Laura parked the Subaru at the edge of the lot, her tires crunching over a thin layer of gravel and pine needles. She glanced through the windshield, her breath catching as she took in the view. The house, tall, brooding, and wrapped in silence, stood like a monument to time itself. The paint had long since peeled away, and the roof sagged like tired shoulders. Vines twisted up the front columns of the porch, weaving into the old wood like nature reclaiming its own. Olivia stirred in the passenger seat, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Is this it?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the long drive and thick with hesitation. "This is it," Laura replied, trying to sound optimistic. "Our new home." Neither of them moved at first. The house seemed to breathe in the quiet of the forest around it, nestled between tall pines that swayed gently in the late morning breeze. No neighbors in sight, no distant traffic, just the sound of birds and the faint rustle of branches. Olivia coughed, a sharp, dry sound that made Laura instantly alert. "We'll get inside and open the windows," she said quickly. "Fresh air, remember?" They stepped out of the truck, Laura grabbing her daughter's hand and guiding her toward the front porch. Every step groaned beneath their feet, the wood warped and soft in places. A faded "for sale" sign still leaned drunkenly in the overgrown grass. When Laura unlocked the door, it groaned open like something out of an old movie. A cloud of dust billowed out into the sunlight, making Olivia cough again, more violently this time. Laura wrapped an arm around her and pulled her back. "That's it," she said, grabbing an N95 mask from her bag and gently fitting it over Olivia's mouth and nose. "No more breathing that in. Stay right here for now, sweetheart." She stepped into the house alone, each footfall stirring up motes of dust that danced in the light. The air was thick. Old paper, mildew, dry wood. It smelled like time, Laura thought, like the slow decay of things left behind. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not just the absence of people, but an eerie, dense kind of stillness, as if the house had been waiting, holding its breath. Furniture, though covered in white sheets and layered in grime, still stood in place. An old armoire loomed in the hallway, its mirror spiderwebbed with cracks. The living room had a grand fireplace, and above it, an ornate mantel carved with a design Laura didn't recognize. 3 overlapping circles surrounded by vines. Oddly precise. It didn't match the usual Victorian pattern she was used to seeing. She opened all the windows, letting the forest air pour in. Outside, Olivia waited on the porch, clutching her stuffed bunny and squinting into the sun. "It's going to take a while," Laura admitted, rejoining her, "but we'll get it clean, I promise." By noon, Olivia had started sneezing uncontrollably despite the mask, her eyes red and swollen. "I need to get her out of here," Laura murmured to herself. Fast. She scanned the welcome folder from the county and found a list of nearby stores. One, Harmon Supply and Timber, was less than 10 minutes away in town. She didn't know what she'd need yet. Filters, fans, industrial cleaners, but she knew she couldn't clean a 40-year-old dust trap with just elbow grease and hope. "Come on," she said, helping Olivia back into the truck. "We're going on a quick supply run." Maple Hollow was exactly what she expected from a small Vermont town. Red brick buildings, American flags on lampposts, and tidy storefronts with hand-painted signs. Harmon's was easy to find, housed in an old converted mill building with wide double doors and stacks of lumber outside. Inside, the scent of sawdust, varnish, and warm wood was comforting. Practical, tangible. Laura found the cleaning supply aisle and was crouched in front of the industrial-grade purifiers when she heard a voice behind her. "New face in town?" She turned and looked up into the eyes of a man about her age, with windblown hair and a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He held a clipboard and a measuring tape hung from his belt. "Yeah," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Just moved into the old Whitlow property." His expression flickered. Curiosity, then something else. "You bought the Whitlow house?" "I did," she replied. "Kind of a fixer-upper." "That's putting it nicely," he chuckled, extending a hand. "Nate Harmon. My family owns this place." "Laura Brennan," she said, shaking his hand. "And this is Olivia." Olivia gave a tiny wave, half hidden behind her mother's leg. "You're going to need more than filters," Nate said, eyeing the items in Laura's cart. "If that house has been sealed up for decades, you'll want mold test kits too, and probably a respirator." "Sounds fun," Laura said dryly. "I can put together a care package," he offered. "We help newcomers out around here." "That's very kind," she replied, surprised by the offer. "I wasn't expecting the welcome wagon at the hardware store." He smiled. "In a place like Maple Hollow, news travels fast, especially when it's the Whitlow house." Laura tilted her head. "Everyone keeps saying that." "What's the story?" Nate hesitated. "Well, depends who you ask. Some say it's haunted, some say cursed. I'd say it's just old and neglected. But yeah, people talk. Whitlow disappeared in '79. House sat empty since. Kind of a local legend." "That's comforting," she muttered. "I wouldn't let it get to you," Nate said. "But if you ever need help with the structure or, navigating small-town weirdness, you know where to find me." He loaded her cart with additional supplies and gave her a local's discount, which she didn't ask for but gratefully accepted. Back at the house, Laura set up the air purifiers immediately, running extension cords from room to room. She cleaned just enough of the living room to place a small mattress for Olivia to nap while she tackled the rest. Hours passed in a blur of scrubbing, airing out, and tossing out decayed curtains. She kept circling back to the carving on the fireplace mantel, drawn to its symmetry and oddity. 3 circles, interlocking, almost like a seal. By sunset, Laura stood in the backyard with a glass of water, watching the pines sway gently beyond the field. Olivia sat in a lawn chair, her coloring book balanced on her knees, humming quietly. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. As she turned to go inside, she caught sight of a neighbor across the road, an elderly woman in a straw hat, tending a garden. The woman waved once, slowly, then returned to her work. Laura waved back, unsure what to make of it. Inside, Olivia called out, "Mom, this house makes weird noises." "It's just settling," Laura said automatically. But in truth, she'd heard them too. Creaks in the walls, a soft thud upstairs, though no one had gone up yet. Later that night, as the wind howled gently through the pine trees, Laura sat on the edge of her mattress, her body sore and her mind restless. The Whitlow house wasn't just a renovation project. It was something else. Something waiting. And tomorrow, she'd find out what. The first full morning in the Whitlow house brought with it a chill that crept through the old window frames and settled into Laura's bones. The sun was barely up, and already she had a broom in one hand and a worn rag in the other, facing the sheer magnitude of the cleanup ahead. Dust coated every surface like a shroud, and cobwebs had turned corners into haunted alcoves. The air was thick with the scent of age, wood, paper, and time. Laura had decided to start with the kitchen. It was the heart of any home, and this one looked like it hadn't seen a home-cooked meal since disco was still on the radio. The yellowed cabinets hung loosely from rusted hinges. The cast-iron sink was stained with decades of mineral buildup. The stove, an ancient relic with curved legs and nickel-plated knobs, looked like it belonged in a museum. She tied her hair back with a bandana, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Olivia sat on the floor in the adjacent dining area, flipping through a dusty box of old hardcover books they'd found stacked in a built-in hutch. Her asthma had been acting up again that morning, the dust clearly a trigger, but she'd insisted on helping, even if it meant staying seated and quiet. "If you see anything moldy or smells weird, don't touch it," Laura called out without looking. "Just set it aside." "Got it," Olivia said, her voice muffled through the dust mask she wore obediently. She'd found a storybook about constellations and was flipping through its yellowing pages with childlike curiosity. Halfway through scrubbing down the kitchen counters, Laura heard Olivia speak again. This time, her tone was different. "Mom, there's something inside this book." Laura wiped her hands on her jeans and walked over. Olivia held up an old leather-bound novel, the spine cracked with age. Between its pages was a folded sheet of parchment, brittle at the edges. Laura took it carefully, eyeing the faded ink. "Dearest reader, if you are reading this, it means the house has found new hands. Somewhere within these walls, a piece of my legacy lies hidden, a place where truths were locked away when the world stopped listening. This home was once more than dust and beams. Look where the light forgets to fall." J.W. Laura's eyebrows furrowed. J.W. must be John Whitlow, the last recorded owner of the house who had vanished without a trace decades ago. The phrasing was poetic, almost cryptic. A place where truths were locked away. And what did it mean, where the light forgets to fall? She folded the letter and slid it into the back pocket of her jeans, her mind already spinning. Whatever this legacy was, it had been purposefully concealed. She glanced at Olivia, who had gone back to reading, blissfully unaware of the tension the letter had introduced into the morning. "Good find, sweetheart," Laura said, forcing a smile. "That book might be worth keeping." The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of sweeping, scrubbing, and tossing out the unsalvageable. By early afternoon, the kitchen floor was visible for the first time in years, and Laura had managed to wrestle one of the windows open to let in fresh air. Olivia had migrated to the corner of the living room, still buried in books. It was while cleaning the living room walls that Laura noticed it. She had peeled away a section of old wallpaper that had already begun curling at the edges. Beneath it, the plaster was cracked and uneven, not unusual for a house this old. But as she pressed her hand against it, part of the surface gave way more than it should have. A faint crack ran in a jagged line about 3 feet high. Laura leaned closer, tracing it with her fingertips. There was something off about it, the way it curved at one end, as if framing a boundary rather than following a random fracture. She knocked her knuckles gently against the wall. Most of it gave a dull thud, but the space within the crack had a different tone, hollow. She stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. It might be nothing, just a patch of weak plaster, but it also might be something else, something hidden. The words from the letter echoed again in her mind. Look where the light forgets to fall. The spot was tucked behind a tall shelf that had long since been emptied of anything useful, its frame warped from years of neglect. If Laura hadn't decided to move it to scrub the floor beneath, she might never have seen the wall behind it at all. She moved the shelf fully aside, revealing more of the cracked wall. Dust rose in a lazy cloud, making her cough. Behind her, Olivia looked up. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah," Laura said, her voice hoarse. "Just some stubborn grime." She didn't want to worry her daughter, not until she knew more. Grabbing a flashlight, Laura crouched beside the wall again. The light revealed the crack in greater detail now, and she could see that the plaster had crumbled slightly around the edges. Not just damage, deliberate removal. Someone had once tried to seal something here, but not too well. Laura didn't press further, not yet. Her instincts told her to tread carefully. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, casting amber rays through the cracked window panes, Laura had resecured the book and the letter in a locked drawer of her makeshift office upstairs. She told Olivia they'd call it a day, and together they heated up a simple dinner of canned soup and toast. They ate on the floor of the cleared kitchen, their backs against the newly cleaned cabinets, listening to the creaks of the old house settle into the night. "Do you think this place has ghosts?" Olivia asked between spoonfuls. Laura smiled faintly. Only the good kind. But in truth, she wasn't sure. As Olivia drifted off to sleep that night, nestled in a sleeping bag near the fireplace, Laura sat quietly on the floor, staring into the flickering flames. Her mind churned with questions, suspicions, and possibilities. Whatever secrets this house held, they were beginning to whisper through the walls. And Laura Brennan wasn't sure yet whether she was ready to hear them. But tomorrow she knew she would return to that crack in the wall, and she would start digging. The sun was just beginning to pierce through the canopy of pine trees when Laura pulled on her work gloves and returned to the crumbling section of wall in the library. The strange crack Olivia had pointed out still zigzagged like a lightning bolt from the baseboard to nearly halfway up the wall, its presence gnawing at Laura's thoughts all night. There was something unnatural about it, not just a result of age or settling, but something else, something hidden. The plaster had begun to flake around the edges, brittle from years of neglect. Laura gently tapped her hammer along the edge of a loose tile. With a soft pop, it broke free, revealing brickwork behind it. Her pulse quickened. That was unusual. Most interior walls in homes this age were wood lath and plaster, not masonry. Carefully, she began to chisel away more of the surrounding material, mindful not to damage what lay beneath. As the morning light filtered in through the dusty window panes, Laura removed brick after brick, each one looser than the last. By the time she reached the fifth row, her hand slid into empty space. She froze. Her breath caught. Behind the wall was a hollow cavity, a space deliberately built into the structure. She reached for her flashlight and aimed the beam into the gap. The dust swirled like tiny ghosts in the golden light, and then she saw it, a boxy, iron shape set back inside the cavity. It was a safe, old, heavy, and coated in a thick film of time. The circular dial gleamed faintly, and there was no visible keyhole, just the tarnished handle and a manufacturer's plate so worn the name was unreadable. Laura stared at it, stunned. Her fingers curled slightly on the brick ledge, as if anchoring herself to reality. Her first instinct was to call someone, but who? The police? Number not yet. Nate? Her thoughts drifted uneasily. Number not even Nate. Not until she knew what this was. If it was empty, if it was just a relic from another century, there was no sense in creating a storm. She covered the gap with a thin drape she found in a storage trunk and quietly swept the broken bits of plaster into a pile. The safe would have to wait. For now, the mystery would remain hers alone. Later that afternoon, while securing a warped floorboard in the hallway, Laura heard the familiar rumble of a pickup truck pulling up the drive. She wiped her hands on a rag and stepped outside, just as Nate Harmon was unloading 2 sacks of grout mix and a wooden crate of copper fittings. "Hey, stranger," Nate called with a grin. "Heard you might need some help patching that leaky kitchen sink." Laura smiled, trying to steady her thoughts. "And word travels fast in Maple Hollow, doesn't it?" "Lightning quick," he said, hopping down from the truck. "Betty from the diner says you've officially won the award for most ambitious renovation project this side of the county." Laura led him around the back, where she'd cleared access to the basement utility room. As he knelt to inspect the old plumbing lines, Laura couldn't help but watch the way he worked. Measured, focused, competent. He asked a few questions about water pressure and pipe routes, then stood and wiped his hands. "Well, good news is, your plumbing's not a disaster. Bad news is, those copper lines are original to the house. They'll need replacing soon." "Of course they will," Laura muttered. "I wouldn't want to get too comfortable." They both laughed. As the sound faded, Nate looked up at the house. "You ever get that feeling?" he asked. "Like a place is trying to tell you something, like it's holding on to stories too big to keep quiet?" Laura's heart skipped. "I do," she replied carefully. "All the time lately." He gave her a curious glance, then changed the subject. They spent another hour reviewing structural weaknesses in the floor joists and discussing options for the upstairs railing. Laura offered him coffee, but he politely declined. He had other deliveries to make. Still, as he climbed into his truck, he hesitated. "You ever find anything unusual in the house?" he asked casually. Laura's breath caught for half a second. "Define unusual," she replied with a playful shrug. Nate grinned but didn't press. "If you do, let me know. Houses like this, Whitlow's place especially, people around here say it's more than just lumber and brick." After he left, Laura leaned against the porch column and stared out at the tree line. She could still feel the weight of his question pressing into her spine. Her eyes flicked toward the library window, where the hidden wall was now disguised beneath a lacy curtain. That evening, the wind picked up, rustling the pine trees with a hushed sort of warning. Laura made Olivia her usual chamomile tea and tucked her into bed, reassuring her daughter that the forest sounds were just friendly trees saying good night. Once Olivia was asleep, Laura crept back to the library with a notebook and flashlight. She stood in front of the wall, staring at the safe concealed within, and jotted down every detail she remembered: its size, its dial, its position relative to the floor. If she couldn't open it yet, she could at least understand it. She thought about locksmiths, about secrecy, about whether secrets buried for 40 years should stay that way. She was halfway through a rough sketch when something made her freeze. A shadow moved across the curtain. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't the wind. Laura clicked off the flashlight, her breath tightening. Silence swelled around her as she stepped lightly toward the window. The porch light outside flickered once, then went dark. Slowly, she eased the curtain aside. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the beam of moonlight, still, watching. Her fingers gripped the window frame. No movement, no sound, just the sense of being seen. Then the figure took a single step backward and vanished into the woods. Laura stumbled back from the window, her pulse pounding in her ears. She didn't scream, didn't wake Olivia. Instead, she locked every door and double-checked every window. Then she sat on the edge of her bed for nearly an hour, notebook still in hand, eyes fixed on the darkened trees outside. Whatever secrets this house held, she realized, she wasn't the only one looking for them. The morning started like any other since they'd moved into the Whitlow house, dusty, chilly, and oddly quiet. Laura was halfway through patching a hole in the parlor ceiling when she heard Olivia's excited voice call from the living room. "Mom, come quick, I found something behind the fireplace." Laura set down her putty knife and hurried over, heart skipping slightly. Olivia was crouched near the old cast-iron hearth, her sleeves covered in soot, her cheeks flushed with the thrill of discovery. In her hand was a small, rusted brass key. "It fell out when I was reaching for my sketchbook," Olivia said, holding it up. "It was wedged behind one of the bricks in the side panel." Laura took the key, brushing ash from its surface. It was small, maybe 2 inches long, with an ornate, oval head. Her pulse quickened. She glanced toward the hidden wall in the hallway closet, the one that had revealed a vintage safe just days earlier. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can you go get your inhaler and take a break on the porch for a bit? I want to check something." Olivia nodded, still beaming with curiosity. "Tell me what's in it after." Once Olivia was outside, Laura went to the closet. She'd kept the discovery of the hidden safe a secret, unsure of what lay inside or who she could trust with it. The narrow crawl space behind the closet had taken effort to clear out, loose boards, old nails, and layers of debris, but the safe had been unmistakable, an iron box set into the wall with a corroded keyhole and no identifying marks. She knelt before it now, the brass key warm in her hand. With a deep breath, she inserted it into the lock and turned. A soft click echoed in the cramped space. For a moment, she just stared, heart pounding in her chest. Then, slowly, she pulled the door open. The hinges groaned, revealing a stack of old manila folders, a rolled-up map, and a smaller metal lockbox about the size of a shoebox. Laura reached in, careful not to disturb the delicate edges of the documents. She carried the items to the kitchen table, where light from the window spilled across the weathered paper. Most of the folders were stamped Union Federal Trust in faded blue ink. Her brow furrowed. That name rang a bell, though she couldn't place it. She opened the top folder. Inside were copies of deposit slips, ledgers, and internal memos, all dated between 1977 and 1979. One sheet had a red-inked note scrawled diagonally across it. Confidential, do not transfer without authorization. Missing funds audit. March 2nd, 1979. Laura stared at the date. March 1979. That was the same year the previous owner, John Whitlow, had vanished. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned to the next document. It was a memo referencing a discrepancy in vault cash during internal audits, over $800,000 unaccounted for. Beneath it, clipped to the same page, was a handwritten note. J.W. has access to sub-ledger keys, monitoring behavior, report if he attempts to resign. Laura's skin prickled. The map, when she unrolled it, was hand-drawn. It depicted a parcel of land labeled Whitlow property, with notations in the margins, measurements, scribbled arrows, and an X marked behind what appeared to be the stables, now just a collapsed wooden frame near the back tree line. Lastly, she examined the small metal lockbox. It was latched, but not locked. Inside, she found a single Polaroid photo of a man in a bank uniform, young, lean, sharply dressed in a blazer, with a Union Federal Trust badge on the lapel. On the back, written in fading ink, J.W., March 1979, final week. Laura felt a chill crawl up her spine. J.W. John Whitlow. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the photo. It was him. There was no mistaking it. The same angular jawline she'd seen in a dusty portrait upstairs, the same deep-set eyes. It was all starting to align. A former bank employee, missing since 1979, a secret safe hidden inside his old house, financial documents implicating him in a major internal fraud. She couldn't help but whisper aloud, "What the hell happened here?" Still trying to process it all, she brought her laptop over and began typing the name into a search bar. John Whitlow, Union Federal Trust, 1979. It didn't take long for the results to load. Most were archives from Vermont newspapers, scanned copies of yellowed headlines and blurred text. But one article stood out, a front-page piece from the Burlington Record, dated April 14th, 1979. Bank employee disappears following investigation into missing funds, Laura clicked. The article detailed how federal auditors had flagged a large discrepancy in the accounts of Union Federal Trust. John Whitlow, a senior vault technician and longtime employee, had been placed under administrative review. Days later, he vanished. His car was found parked near a remote trailhead in the Green Mountains, but no trace of him was ever recovered. Police had suspected suicide or flight. Some even speculated he was murdered by others involved in the scheme. But no charges were ever filed. The money was never recovered. Laura leaned forward, rereading the final lines. No witnesses, no evidence, no confession. Just a quiet man with a meticulous record and $862,000 missing. She sat back, the weight of it all pressing down on her. The safe, the documents, the photo. This wasn't just some forgotten country house. This was the epicenter of a 40-year-old mystery. A man had vanished, a fortune had disappeared, and somehow all of it had landed in her lap. Laura looked toward the living room, where Olivia was now coloring quietly. The last thing she needed was to get involved in something dangerous. But if the authorities were still looking for answers, if there was a possibility of more buried beneath this house, she needed to understand what she'd walked into. She packed the documents into a tote bag and slid it under the sink, behind a box of cleaning supplies. Not yet, she thought. Not until I know more. Because one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. This house wasn't just old. It remembered everything. The next morning, a gray curtain of clouds hung low over Maple Hollow, casting a washed-out hue across the old Whitlow farmhouse. Laura sat at the kitchen table, the safe's contents spread before her, yellowed banking documents, the faded map with handwritten notes, and the line that had sent her heart skittering. Union Federal Trust, missing 1979. She'd slept little. Every creak of the house the night before had sounded sharper, closer. Even Olivia, usually curled beside her on the mattress, had stirred in her sleep. After sending Olivia off with a warm scarf and a gentle reminder not to mention anything about hidden rooms or old papers at school, Laura locked the front door behind her and slid the files into her satchel. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but if the name John Whitlow had ties to a missing federal bank deposit, there had to be something in the town's historical archives. And in a place like Maple Hollow, that meant only one destination: the town library. The building was a converted church just off the square, its Gothic windows casting warm light across oak-paneled interiors. Inside, the librarian, Mrs. Eloise Parrish, looked up from her desk with a curious smile. She wore a chunky hand-knit cardigan, reading glasses that hung from a pearl chain, and a knowing look Laura had quickly learned was common among longtime residents. "Good morning," Laura greeted, trying to sound casual despite the whirlwind in her chest. "I was hoping to look through some old newspapers, maybe late 70s? "Of course," Mrs. Parrish said, folding her hands over a copy of Vermont Living. "That'd be the microfilm reels in the archive room. Local paper went weekly starting 1974. Any particular topic?" Laura hesitated. "Banking. I'm looking into property history, and someone mentioned the Union Federal Trust case." Mrs. Parrish's eyes sharpened. "Ah, that mess." Laura kept her expression neutral. "So it was real?" "Oh, very real. Half the town was buzzing about it for years. Still comes up at potlucks when folks get nostalgic or drunk." Laura smiled politely. "Do you remember what happened?" Mrs. Parrish lowered her voice and leaned forward, the way people do when truth is tangled up with long-guarded rumor. The story broke in late November of 1979. A sealed armored courier headed for the Union Federal Branch in Albany vanished en route. Millions missing. The FBI swooped in like buzzards. The truck was found abandoned near Keene, doors locked from the outside. No trace of the money or the men. She tapped her nails on the wooden desk. They eventually arrested 2 drivers, but one got off. Claimed he was forced at gunpoint by a third man, John Whitlow. That name never left our records, but no one ever found him. Or the money. Laura's mouth was suddenly dry. "Was he from here?" "Born and raised. Quiet man. Security background. Moved back just a year before the heist and bought that old farmhouse you live in now." It felt like all the air had been vacuumed from Laura's lungs. "He vanished not long after. Some folks said he skipped town. Others claimed the forest swallowed him whole." Mrs. Parrish squinted thoughtfully. "That house of his. People always said it held secrets. You know, it's funny. You're the first person to buy it since the county took it over." Laura offered a tense smile, her fingers tightening around the satchel's strap. "Thank you. This is really helpful." In the archive room, she sat at the microfilm reader, scrolling through reels from the fall of 1979. It didn't take long. There, in bold font across the Maple Hollow Weekly, "Union Federal Funds Missing. Local man sought in connection." The article included a grainy photo of a young man in a dark suit, with sharp eyes and a solemn expression. John Whitlow. There was no mistaking it. The resemblance to the portrait she'd seen in the upstairs bedroom was uncanny. The article outlined the basics: an unaccounted-for third accomplice, believed to have orchestrated the inside job, disappeared without a trace. Authorities searched Whitlow's property but found nothing. Locals suspected he'd buried the money somewhere, or worse, died with the secret. Laura scrolled through follow-up stories. Months passed, then years. Leads went cold. The case faded into unresolved history. She printed copies of the most relevant articles and tucked them between the banking documents, then glanced at her watch. Nearly noon. She'd promised Olivia she'd be home for lunch, and she didn't want her daughter alone longer than necessary. Back at the house, as Laura unlocked the front door, she found Nate's truck already in the driveway. He leaned against the porch railing, arms folded, eyes flicking toward her satchel. "Hey," he greeted, nodding casually. "Thought I'd drop off that chimney sealant we talked about." Laura forced a smile. "Thanks. Sorry I wasn't here earlier. Ran an errand into town." Nate didn't move. Everything okay? Yeah, just a lot on my plate with the house and Olivia's health. He gave her a look that wasn't unkind, but wasn't naive either. You seem distracted. You sure it's just the house? Laura hesitated. It's nothing. Just adjusting to small-town life, I guess. A silence stretched between them. Nate, sensing he wasn't going to get the truth, handed her the bucket and stepped back. All right, just making sure you're good. I appreciate it, Laura said softly. Really? That afternoon, once Nate had gone, she locked herself in her makeshift home office. It was a former sewing room on the first floor, small, windowless, but private. She opened the bottom drawer of the antique writing desk and pulled out a wooden box she'd found in the attic. Its brass latch clicked open with a satisfying snap. Carefully, she placed all the documents inside, the bank files, the map, the printed newspaper clippings, even the photo of John Whitlow. Then she snapped the box shut, wrapped it in an old wool scarf, and pushed it to the back of the closet behind a false panel she discovered during renovations. A deep breath steadied her. This was bigger than she had imagined, bigger than just restoring a home or starting over. If the documents were legitimate, she was standing in the center of a 40-year-old mystery tied to federal theft. She didn't know yet whether to feel thrilled or terrified. That night, as she double-checked the windows and locked the doors, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face looked older somehow, drawn, thoughtful, a woman carrying something heavier than paint buckets or toolboxes. Behind her, the shadows flickered as the wind rattled the pines. In the silence of the sleeping house, Laura whispered to herself, "What the hell did I just step into?" And from the forest beyond the window, as if in answer, came the faint rustle of something, or someone, passing just out of sight. Laura was awakened by a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the creaking timbers or the wind through the pine trees. It was the low, unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. She sat up in bed, heart already racing, and reached instinctively for the sweatshirt draped over the old rocking chair beside her. The house was still dim with early morning light, the sun barely cresting over the hills. A quick glance at the clock on her nightstand confirmed it was just after 6 a.m. Peering through the lace curtain of her bedroom window, Laura froze. 2 black SUVs were parked at the end of her driveway, their windows tinted dark enough to conceal the occupants. Her first thought was irrational panic. Was this a repossession? Had the county changed its mind about the auction? Then she saw the 2 figures stepping out, both dressed in dark suits, moving with the calm precision of people who weren't in a hurry because they already knew what they were going to find. Her blood ran cold. She slipped out of the room, careful not to wake Olivia, and made her way to the front door just as the knock came, 3 firm, evenly spaced raps. Laura opened it just enough to peer out. "Laura Brennan?" the woman asked, holding up a leather-bound badge. "I'm Special Agent Rachel Diaz. This is my partner, Special Agent Keller. We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Laura swallowed hard. Her voice, when it emerged, was hoarse. "Can I ask what this is about?" Agent Diaz's tone was professional but not unkind. "We have reason to believe this property may be connected to an unresolved federal investigation. May we come in?" Laura blinked. A dozen questions flooded her mind, none with answers that made any sense. She opened the door a little wider. "I'm sorry. Can you be more specific? What investigation?" Keller, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward slightly. "Do you have any documents or materials that might pertain to the Union Federal Trust robbery of 1979? The name hit her like a punch to the chest. Her mouth opened, but before she could respond, a coughing fit echoed down the hallway. "Olivia." Laura turned instinctively. "My daughter. She has asthma. I need to check on her." Diaz nodded. "Go ahead. We'll wait." Laura rushed back to Olivia's room and found her sitting up in bed, her small frame racked with deep, rattling coughs. Laura helped her sit upright, grabbed the inhaler from the nightstand, and held it steady as Olivia took 2 sharp puffs. Gradually, the coughing eased. "Breathe slowly, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're okay. Just breathe." Olivia leaned into her, exhausted. Who was at the door? "Just someone asking about the house," Laura said softly, brushing the girl's damp hair from her forehead. "Get some rest. I'll be right back." Back in the hallway, Laura took a deep breath, then returned to the front door. She stepped outside, closing it gently behind her. "Okay," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "Yes, I found something. Some documents. But I haven't gone public with anything, and I didn't fully understand what they meant." Agent Diaz gave a slight nod. "That's all right. Can you show us what you found?" "I will," Laura said, her voice stronger now, "but only under one condition. You do whatever it takes to protect my daughter. She has health issues, and we just got here. I can't have her world turned upside down again." Agent Keller glanced at Diaz, who nodded slowly. "Ms. Brennan, we're not here to make things harder for you. Quite the opposite. If what you have is relevant to the Union federal case, we're here to make sure it's handled properly and safely for everyone involved." Laura held her eyes for a long moment, searching for any trace of insincerity. She saw none. "All right," she said finally. "Come inside, quietly. My daughter needs to rest." The agents followed her into the house, their steps muted on the worn wooden floors. Laura led them to her office, where the box sat locked in the bottom drawer of the old roll-top desk. Her hand trembled slightly as she unlocked it. The box contained the documents from the safe, the bank records, the faded map, the typed memo labeled Union Federal Trust, missing 1979, and the small, weathered envelope marked only with the initials J.W. Agent Keller carefully opened the envelope, scanning the note inside. Agent Diaz began photographing the documents methodically, pausing to read certain lines. "These are legitimate," Diaz said, her tone now tinged with something more personal. "I was only a child when the Union federal case made national headlines. The case was never solved. John Whitlow vanished with nearly $1 million in cash. The assumption was he either fled the country or was killed by one of his accomplices." Laura stared at her. "You're saying this house might have been his hideout?" "Or, at the very least, part of the cover-up," Keller replied. "We need to secure this site. We may need to bring in forensics and ground radar." Laura blinked. "But what about my daughter? We live here. We don't have anywhere else to go." Diaz looked at her partner, then back at Laura. "We can work around that. As long as you cooperate, we'll make sure your living space remains safe and intact. No press, no disruption. Just an investigation. Quiet as possible." Laura exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders in a slow wave. "Okay, just tell me what you need." Diaz extended a hand. "First, thank you for coming forward. We'll do everything we can to make sure your trust in us isn't misplaced." Laura shook her hand. "I just want to do the right thing. For Olivia. For this town." Outside, the first golden light of morning spilled across the pines, casting long shadows on the gravel driveway, where two unmarked SUVs now stood guard over a farmhouse that held more secrets than Laura had ever imagined. The past was stirring, and it had found its way to her door. The quiet morning air in Maple Hollow was shattered by the crunch of tires rolling across Laura Brennan's gravel driveway. Federal agents in dark windbreakers began unloading gear from a pair of black SUVs as orange cones and yellow tape slowly turned her front yard into a restricted federal zone. Laura stood on the porch with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the spectacle unfold as if she were trapped inside a movie she hadn't auditioned for. Agent Rachel Diaz approached with calm authority, a clipboard in one hand, a thermos of coffee in the other. "Ms. Brennan, we'll try to keep disruption to a minimum," she said, nodding toward the now growing FBI presence near the barn. "But I need to be very clear. This is a live federal investigation. We'll need access to the grounds, including the outbuildings." Laura nodded slowly, still adjusting to the surreal shift her life had taken since sunrise. "And me?" she asked, her voice quieter than she expected. Rachel met her eyes. "You're not under investigation, Laura. You're a witness, an important one." Laura exhaled sharply, some small part of the weight in her chest lifting. "So, I'm not in trouble?" Rachel shook her head. "Number. In fact, your cooperation has already helped us connect decades-old dots that never quite lined up. That journal, the safe, the documents, they've given us probable cause to investigate this property as a potential hiding site, tied to the 1979 Union Federal Trust robbery. Laura glanced across the field, where Olivia sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket with her sketch pad, drawing the barn in charcoal lines. And her? She's just a child, Agent Diaz. She doesn't need to be part of this. We'll do everything we can to minimize her exposure, Rachel assured. She's not our concern. Your safety and her well-being come first. But this is happening, and we may find more than anyone expected. As Rachel walked away to coordinate with the team, Laura stepped down from the porch and wandered toward the barn. The map from the safe had clearly marked a point roughly 30 feet east of the structure, close to where the old horse corral fence leaned against a wind-warped cedar tree. That's where a small crew had already started staking out the area. Agent Keller stood nearby, overseeing ground-penetrating radar being rolled across the spot in neat, methodical passes. He gave Laura a quick nod as she approached. "We've got a significant density anomaly right where the map indicates," he said, pointing to the device's screen. "Roughly rectangular in shape, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Could be a vault, could be a storm shelter, but it doesn't match any of the old survey records for this property." "And it's buried?" Laura asked. "About 5 feet down," Keller confirmed. "We're bringing in a light excavator now, but we'll start by digging manually." Laura felt Olivia's small hand slip into hers. The girl had crept up behind her silently, holding her sketch pad against her chest, her wide, curious eyes fixed on the marked ground. "Mom," Olivia whispered, "why would there be a secret bunker under our garden?" Laura knelt beside her daughter and gently smoothed the girl's hair behind her ear. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," she said softly, "but I think it's something that's been waiting to be found for a very long time." The digging began within the hour. Shovels struck dirt, earth was moved in organized, careful piles, and Laura stood back as the FBI worked like a well-oiled machine. Keller directed the agents with practiced calm, while Rachel managed the documentation process from a temporary field desk set up near the barn's entrance. By early afternoon, the crew hit concrete. "It's solid," one agent reported, rapping knuckles against what sounded like a thick slab. "Definitely not just a foundation pour. Could be a lid or entryway." They cleared more of the soil until the edges became visible, a rectangular concrete cap with a rusted iron handle embedded at one end. Laura watched as they paused to scan it for wiring, traps, or chemical signatures. None were found. "Let's get eyes in," Rachel said, donning gloves. With practiced hands, she directed a narrow camera probe through a drilled vent hole. The tiny monitor showed a concrete-walled chamber beneath the lid, dry and intact. Olivia tugged at Laura's sleeve again. "Is there treasure inside?" she asked in a stage whisper. Laura glanced at Rachel. "We're not sure," she said carefully. "But whatever's in there, someone went to a lot of trouble to keep it hidden." By late afternoon, with official clearance granted from higher-ups, the concrete hatch was carefully pried open. The sound it made was thick and heavy, a groan of secrets being exhumed from the earth after decades of silence. Inside, the agents found a narrow flight of steps leading down to a short corridor. At the end was a second steel door, this one far more modern than the concrete around it. A keypad lock was bolted to the side, coated in years of grime. A faint red light still blinked on its face. "What kind of person puts an electronic lock on a bunker buried under a farmhouse?" Keller muttered, kneeling to examine it. Rachel didn't answer. She was already flipping through her notes from the journal, comparing markings, dates, and annotations. "This wasn't just a panic room," she said eventually. "This was intentional, purpose-built. And if Whitlow had access to federal bank vault schematics like we suspect, then he knew how to make it disappear." From her vantage point near the barn, Laura shivered. She glanced again at Olivia, now sitting quietly on a stump, clutching her sketchbook and watching everything with a combination of wonder and caution far beyond her years. What had started as a desperate bid for a new life had transformed into something else entirely. Laura hadn't bought just a house. She had unearthed a chapter of American history buried under dust, pine needles, and forgotten crimes. Back at the main house that evening, Laura sat at the kitchen table while the agents remained outside, finalizing reports. Olivia curled up on the couch nearby, dozing lightly, her breathing mercifully quiet and steady. Rachel entered with a folder in hand. "We've officially secured the property for investigation," she said. "But you and Olivia can stay here. You're not suspects, Laura. You're our strongest witness." "And what happens now?" Laura asked, staring at the grain of the worn oak table. "We'll open the bunker once our tech team can bypass that lock. In the meantime, I'd suggest keeping your daughter indoors and away from the dig site." Laura nodded. She saw more today than any child should. Rachel's voice softened. "She's tougher than she looks. And so are you." Laura looked up, surprised to see genuine empathy in the agent's eyes. "I'll do whatever I have to," she said quietly, "to keep her safe." Rachel gave a small, reassuring smile. "So will we." As the sun dipped behind the trees and the forest around Whitlow House grew dark and still, Laura stood by the window, watching distant silhouettes move across the yard under floodlights. Somewhere beneath that dirt was a truth sealed in concrete and silence for over 4 decades. And now, whether they were ready or not, it had begun to speak again. The morning air was still, unusually so, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Laura stood on the porch of the Whitlow house, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee gone cold, her gaze fixed on the fenced-off area where the FBI team had been working for hours. Agent Rachel Diaz had been deliberate and calm in her coordination, but the quiet intensity of the operation had everyone on edge. The concrete lid over the buried chamber had been removed late the previous evening, revealing a thick, rusted hatch with no visible markings. Now, under the pale glow of early sunlight, 2 agents in tactical gloves prepared the mechanism for a careful opening. Rachel stood a few feet back, clipboard in hand, nodding at their progress. "Ready?" one of the agents called out. Rachel nodded. "Go ahead." With a groan of protest, the hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow metal staircase descending into darkness. The lead agent adjusted his flashlight and slowly disappeared into the shadows below. Laura felt her heart hammer in her chest. Every instinct told her that whatever lay beneath had the power to reshape everything. Minutes passed. Then came the call. "We found something. You'll want to see this." Rachel descended next, and after a moment's hesitation, she waved Laura over. "Come take a look," she said. Laura approached slowly, passing the uneasy glances of the other agents. As she stepped down into the hidden bunker, the cool, damp air hit her like a whisper from the past. The chamber was tight, but solidly built, the walls lined with aged insulation and steel support beams. In the center sat a large metal safe, military-grade, dented but intact, and next to it, a rotting leather suitcase covered in dust. 2 agents stood to the side, allowing Rachel and Laura room to examine the items. Rachel crouched first, brushing debris from the top of the safe. "Old model, late 60s maybe," she murmured. "Someone knew what they were doing." Laura's eyes were drawn to the suitcase. Its clasp was already unlatched. Rachel opened it carefully, revealing stacks of weathered currency, old $100 and $50 bills, still banded, still smelling faintly of ink and mildew. She let out a slow breath. This looks like the real thing." But it was the envelope taped to the underside of the suitcase lid that caught their attention next. Rachel peeled it free and handed it to Laura. On the front, written in faded ink, was a single line: "If found, give this to the government." Inside was a neatly folded letter, yellowed with time. Laura read it aloud. "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, I am likely long gone. What you found was never mine to keep. I made a mistake, a terrible one. My role in what happened at Union Federal was never meant to go beyond the vault. But secrets have weight, and I have carried this one long enough. Please, do what I could not. Return it. Let the truth have the final word." J.W. Rachel looked over at Laura, her eyes softer than Laura had ever seen them. He tried to make it right, in his own way. Laura nodded, her voice quiet. "So did I. That's why I didn't hide anything. I just didn't want my daughter growing up in a lie." Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You made the right call. Most wouldn't have." A rumble in the driveway interrupted the moment. A familiar pickup truck pulled up and parked near the barn. Nate stepped out, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, confusion crossing his face as he took in the federal presence. He jogged over, slowing only as he spotted Laura emerging from the bunker. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Laura exhaled, her lips curling into a faint, exhausted smile. "I'll explain everything, but I might need your help with something heavy." He followed her to the hatch, his eyebrows raising at the sight of the money and documents. "So, this is what you've been hiding in that old house?" "Not hiding," she said, "just processing." As Nate helped the agents move the safe and suitcase out of the bunker, Laura took a seat on an overturned bucket nearby. Rachel joined her, sitting on the steps leading up to the house. "You know," Rachel began, "you had a dozen chances to take the easy road, bury the truth, sell the house, walk away. But you didn't." Laura didn't look up. "Easy doesn't always mean right. When Olivia got sick, I learned that the hard way. You fight for what matters, even if it hurts." Rachel nodded solemnly. "In my line of work, most people don't choose right. They choose fast, safe, selfish. That's what makes you different." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the low hum of agents working, the rustle of leaves stirred by morning wind. "What happens now?" Laura asked finally. Rachel stood, brushing dust from her jacket. "We catalog the evidence, file the report, and close a 45-year-old case. As for you, we'll be recommending a formal commendation and reward. But I think the bigger thing is, you did something that mattered." As the sun rose higher over Maple Hollow, casting light across the face of the old farmhouse, Laura felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not regret, something closer to peace. And maybe, just maybe, hope. Laura Brennan hadn't seen so many news vans in one place since a college protest 20 years ago. Now, they were parked across the gravel drive of her Vermont farmhouse, their antennas extended like antennae of curious insects. Bright logos adorned their sides. Channel 5, Green Mountain Gazette, a Boston outlet, even one from Albany. It had been less than 72 hours since the FBI uncovered the contents of the concrete vault. Despite their efforts to keep the story sealed tight, the leak had spread like fire on dry pine. It began with whispers. Someone at the hardware store mentioned federal agents digging up the Whitlow property. Someone else saw Nate helping load a heavy lockbox into a black SUV. A volunteer firefighter's cousin swore she overheard radio chatter about recovered funds. In a town the size of Maple Hollow, secrets didn't last long. The moment the Gazette ran the headline, "Buried clue to infamous 1979 bank heist found in local farmhouse," there was no turning back. Inside the house, Laura sat stiffly on the edge of the window seat, her laptop open, though she hadn't typed in an hour. The cursor blinked accusingly on a half-written email to Olivia's teacher, explaining the reason her daughter had missed the past 2 days of school. Across from her, Agent Rachel Diaz leaned against the fireplace mantel, arms crossed, eyes calm but focused. "We tried to contain it," Rachel said, "but once the story hit local media, it was a matter of time before the regional outlets followed. You should prepare for national attention, Laura." Laura rubbed her temples. "How did they find out so quickly?" "I thought this was supposed to be a sealed operation." "It was. Internally, everything followed protocol, but we can't control neighbors with cell phones or gossip in small towns. Someone saw something, or overheard something, and connected dots. It happens." Laura exhaled, the air shaky in her lungs. The discovery, the safe, the FBI, the vault. It had all been surreal. But this, the cameras, the judgmental eyes, felt far more invasive and dangerous. "I have a 9-year-old, she said. "She's already dealing with health issues, adjusting to a new life. She doesn't need to be the daughter of the woman who found the money." Rachel's gaze softened. "Then you need to be in front of the story, not behind it." Laura looked up. "If you let speculation run wild, it will shape how people see you," Rachel continued. "Some will think you were chasing the money. Others might assume you knew more than you told us. I've seen it happen. But if you speak first, share your side clearly, it helps control the narrative." Laura wasn't convinced. "You think I should give interviews?" "Not interviews, just one. One clear, honest statement, public, with us present to support your version. We'll verify your timeline. We'll confirm your cooperation." Before Laura could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Anderson, Olivia's teacher. Olivia seems withdrawn. Classmates asking a lot of questions. Should we move her to another group for now? Laura swallowed hard. Downstairs, Olivia had been coloring quietly for the past hour. Her usual chatter had dulled since the vans arrived. At breakfast, she'd asked if kids at school would still want to sit next to her. That simple question had broken something in Laura's chest. The choice, then, was no longer theoretical. It was urgent. That afternoon, as the sun filtered through thin autumn clouds, Laura stepped outside onto the wraparound porch. Rachel and Keller flanked her discreetly. Dozens of eyes turned, cameras clicked, recorders extended like flowers to sunlight. Laura took a deep breath and spoke clearly into the microphone set on a portable stand. My name is Laura Brennan. I moved to Maple Hollow 6 weeks ago with my daughter Olivia to start over after a difficult divorce. We bought this farmhouse at auction and began renovations, never expecting to find anything other than rotting floorboards and dust. She paused, scanning the sea of expectant faces. What we found instead were documents and a vault tied to the Union Federal Trust robbery in 1979. I turned everything over to the FBI immediately. I never sought publicity, nor did I ever seek to profit from someone else's crime. My only concern is my daughter's well-being and making this house a home. Rachel stepped forward next. The Bureau confirms Ms. Brennan's full cooperation. She is not under investigation. Her discovery has reopened one of the oldest unsolved bank crimes in American history. Her honesty is what allowed this progress. Questions followed, fast, loud, insistent. Laura answered only a few, then stepped away. Keller ushered the crowd back, and the agents helped close the porch doors. Inside, Olivia sat waiting at the top of the stairs. Her eyes, wide but dry, searched Laura's face. Was I brave today, Mom? Even if I didn't say anything? Laura climbed the stairs and hugged her daughter tight. Brave doesn't always mean speaking, she whispered. Sometimes it just means showing up. Outside, the media buzzed, but within the walls of the Whitlow farmhouse, there was quiet. Not peace, not yet. But something close. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. The morning after the press conference felt different, lighter somehow. The sun poured through the kitchen windows of the Whitlow house, catching motes of dust that sparkled in the beams like flecks of gold. Laura stood at the sink, washing breakfast dishes, her hands moving automatically, while her mind replayed the events of the day before. She had spoken plainly, truthfully, and without embellishment. No dramatics, no finger-pointing. Just facts, and her own vulnerable, raw perspective on everything that had happened since moving to Maple Hollow. She hadn't expected much beyond a polite nod from the small crowd of reporters and neighbors gathered outside the library. But what she received instead was something wholly unexpected. Support. Real, vocal, emotional support. By midday, her inbox had been flooded with messages, many from complete strangers. One was from a retired bank teller who remembered the Union Federal Trust building in its heyday. Another from a woman who'd grown up next door to the Whitlow family and had always wondered what had happened to John. But most of the messages simply said, "Thank you. Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for doing the right thing. Thank you for reminding people that integrity still mattered." Laura hadn't cried during the press conference, but she did after reading the message from a single mom in Ohio who said, "Watching you speak gave me the courage to stand up for myself in court today." She didn't feel like a hero, but she did feel, finally, seen. That same afternoon, the FBI made their public statement. In a quiet announcement at the regional office, Special Agent Rachel Diaz confirmed that the recovered money from the 1979 Union Federal Trust robbery had now been fully cataloged and returned to the U.S. Treasury. As part of their long-standing policy, the agency would be recommending a financial award to the individual whose discovery and cooperation led to the closure of the case, Laura Brennan. When she got the call from Rachel, Laura had been sitting at the kitchen table with Olivia, folding laundry. She almost dropped a pair of socks when she heard the number. It wasn't a windfall that would land her on Forbes magazine, but it was more money than she had seen in her entire life. Enough to pay off every debt, enough to make this old house truly safe, enough to start over, not in desperation, but in peace. "Are you okay, Mom?" Olivia had asked, watching the way Laura just stared at the phone after the call ended. "I think," Laura whispered, her throat tight, "we're going to be okay. Really okay." Olivia's health had shown signs of improvement even before the dust from the investigation had settled, but the difference now was astonishing. The air in Maple Hollow was crisp and clean, and their days were calmer, more routine. No more late-night sirens, no more cramped apartments filled with mold and tension. Just quiet days filled with sunlight and chores and laughter. She slept better. She ate more. Her cheeks had color again, and Laura noticed it all with the kind of gratitude that caught her off guard sometimes, making her tear up while watching Olivia pet the neighbor's golden retriever or reading a library book on the porch swing. It wasn't just her daughter's health that was blooming. Their relationship had changed too. There was a safety between them now, not just physical, but emotional. Olivia knew, without needing to be told, that her mother had chosen truth over fear, that she hadn't tried to run or hide from what they'd found, and that choice had made all the difference. On a golden October afternoon, Nate knocked on their front door carrying a basket of apples and a folded flyer. "I come bearing bribes," he said with a grin. Laura raised an eyebrow. "You don't need bribes to get in here. You're always welcome." He stepped inside, his boots leaving faint prints on the polished floor. "Well, then I hope you'll say yes anyway. There's a fall festival in the town square next weekend. Games, cider, hay rides, that kind of thing. Thought maybe you and Olivia might want to come with me." He wasn't nervous, not exactly, but there was something boyish about the way he held the flyer like a peace offering. Laura took it, smiled, then looked up at him. "We'd love to." Later that night, Olivia asked, "Is Mr. Harmon your boyfriend now?" Laura choked on her tea. "What? No, sweetie, he's a friend. A very good friend." Olivia smirked in that knowing way only 9-year-olds could. "He brings us apples. That's boyfriend behavior." 2 days before the festival, Laura received a small, unmarked envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a letter, written in careful cursive on cream stationery. It was from Rachel. "Laura, in this job, we don't often get closure, and we almost never get to say thank you. Thank you for not running. Thank you for not selling the story to the tabloids. Thank you for doing the right thing when it would have been so much easier not to. You reminded me why I joined the Bureau in the first place. I don't know if our paths will cross again, but I hope this place treats you and Olivia well. Keep living by your truth." Rachel Laura folded the letter gently, then slipped it into a small wooden box she kept on her nightstand. She didn't need to reply. The letter wasn't asking for that. It was a passing of the torch, a quiet reminder that choices made in fear never lit the way forward, but those made in faith just might. That weekend, Maple Hollow wrapped itself in flannel and cider and bonfires. The fall festival was every bit as charming as Nate had promised. Olivia wore a hand-knit scarf and ran through piles of leaves with other kids from her class. She ate too much kettle corn, got her face painted like a fox, and danced to the folk band, playing under the gazebo. Laura walked through it all feeling something she hadn't known in years. Lightness. Not because everything was perfect, but because, for once, it didn't have to be. She glanced over at Nate, who was helping an elderly man set up a booth of antique tools. He caught her eye and grinned, then tipped an imaginary hat. And just like that, Laura Brennan, former structural engineer, newly minted single mom, reluctant town hero, knew this was a turning point. The moment when life stopped being about survival and started being about possibility. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above her. Somewhere nearby, Olivia laughed, unburdened and free. Laura closed her eyes for a second and breathed it all in. Hope, real and solid as the land beneath her feet. By the first breath of spring, the farmhouse looked nothing like the crumbling structure Laura and Olivia had stepped into months earlier. Fresh paint glistened on the exterior. The once sagging porch stood firm and welcoming, and newly restored shutters framed each window like eyes blinking into a new chapter. A carefully hung wooden sign swung gently in the breeze. The Whitlow House. Laura had chosen the name deliberately, not just for its historical resonance, but for what it symbolized. Eleanor and John Whitlow had lived lives shaped by secrets, burdened by choices, and ultimately redeemed by truth. Naming the home in their honor felt like a small act of restoration beyond the architecture, an effort to preserve legacy, not just lumber. Inside, sunlight poured into the parlor, now transformed into a warm family room. The floorboards shone with new life. The once cracked walls bore framed photographs of Laura and Olivia's journey, and right above the fireplace, Olivia's newest masterpiece stretched across a large canvas, a colorful depiction of their garden in full bloom, complete with birds, bees, and a radiant sun. Her breathing had stabilized significantly, and her cheeks had a healthy flush that was missing for too long. "It's not just a garden," Olivia told her mom one morning. "It's where the house breathes." Laura had smiled, deeply moved. That evening, she hung the painting in the living room for all visitors to see. One Friday afternoon, as maple leaves began to uncurl and daffodils peeked from flower beds, Nate arrived carrying something wrapped in brown paper and twine. He looked nervous, a rare expression for him. "Thought you might want this for the front porch," he said, clearing his throat. Laura unwrapped the package carefully. It was a handcrafted wooden sign, smooth and polished, carved in elegant lettering, "The Brennan Girls." Beneath the name, 2 tiny hearts. Laura stared at it, her hand lingering over the etching. "Nate, this is..." He raised a hand gently. "It's not a question. It's not a promise. It's just a truth. You've made this house a home, Laura. And maybe I just wanted a place to belong to." There was a long silence between them, the kind that held no awkwardness, only clarity. Laura stepped forward and hugged him, her cheek resting against his shoulder. "You already do." That evening, they hung the sign just below the house's nameplate. 2 names, 1 story. A few days later, on a soft April morning, Laura stood in the yard pruning a young dogwood tree when she noticed a figure at the edge of the gravel driveway. Agent Rachel Diaz. She wasn't in a suit this time, just jeans and a navy windbreaker, her hands tucked into the pockets. They locked eyes from a distance. Laura straightened up, brushing her palms on her jeans. Rachel offered a small wave, but didn't approach. She just stood for a moment, taking in the house, the garden, the hum of something deeply alive. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned to walk back down the road, disappearing around the bend without a word. Laura watched her go, her throat tightening with quiet understanding. There are goodbyes that don't need to be spoken. Some stories end not with punctuation, but with presence. Later that night, after Olivia was tucked into bed, Laura sat by the window in what used to be the dusty old library, now her writing nook. A fresh journal lay in her lap, its spine crisp and unbent. She opened to the first page, the lined paper waiting patiently. She thought about the day she first arrived, exhausted and broke, heart still tender from loss. She thought about the hidden safe, the nighttime whispers of doubt, the courage it took to hand over something that could have changed their fate. And she thought of the people who had quietly helped hold her up when everything seemed ready to collapse. With a deep breath, she put pen to paper and wrote, "From broken to beginning, sometimes all it takes is a single act of courage." Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently, and the stars hung low over Maple Hollow. The Whitlow house stood not as a monument to mystery, but as a testament to faith, the quiet, stubborn kind that holds on when everything else has let go. Laura smiled to herself. Tomorrow, there would be chores and errands, spring festivals and school projects. Life, in all its messy beauty, was moving forward, and this time, they were ready. If this story moved you, if it made you feel like you were standing with Laura at that underground vault, or staring into the sky with a question burning in your chest, then tell us. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in her shoes? What do you believe is still out there, beneath our feet or above our heads? This channel isn't just about storytelling, it's about you, the community we're building, the stories we're uncovering, and the truths that refuse to stay hidden. So, if you believe in truth seekers, in people who carry the flame, not because they ask to, but because no one else would, then don't just watch, stand with us. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one. Turn on notifications so you're first to know when our next chapter drops. because there will be more. Laura's story may have reached a turning point, but what lies ahead is even more compelling. A scientist buried in scandal, a hidden network of facilities across the Midwest, a storm coming that no one sees, yet, and will be here, week by week, piece by piece, uncovering it with you. Because sometimes the only way to fight darkness is to shine a brighter light. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.